Olympiad through Special Africa Continental Hackathon, Africa, following apologies to Steve Hawkins. We are yet to search for the true nature of Africa.
So far in Africa. Yeah, let me say thank you for having me there.
Okay, thank you,
Appreciate your presence.
Dr.
Let's make
Chris
it the best.
Waji, for the
The
excellent
future of Africa
presentation.
will
From the audience, there are no questions, and they have been able to download the handouts too. We from Digital Africa appreciate you. So you can go to the backstage and leave, sir. Thank you, sir, for the night.
No, okay, when we get there, we'll have some questions, right?
Okay, sir. No questions from the audience, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, no.
Okay, sir. Thank you for your time, and, and have a great day, sir.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, so you can go to
Yes,
the
I'm still
backstage.
on.
That translation is not simple. It takes some time. So that impacts the
Okay, so I'll go to the log now.
the research conducted
Okay,
by
sir.
the Education
So you
Partnership
leave
Center
and log out, sir.
is an April 2020 report. Says that a number
it interesting. There is a pattern of issues, challenges, but we need to begin to also look at the solution. So there is some consistency in the view. So the pedagogy of learning, of delivering the content. So the challenges of infrastructure, the challenges of access. Yes, these challenges are true and they are real. But then you also mentioned some very interesting points. And to me, that's 2 points I would identify right away. The first is that if you transit a teacher from a classroom teacher to an online teacher, doesn't necessarily make the teacher better.
No, it doesn't.
So the quality of teaching that you deliver in classroom is not likely to be any better just because you're using technology. I mean, this is a very, very, very useful point for teachers and the whole learning structure. The second point you mentioned, which I'm sure we'll discuss in a bit more details later, is the issue of costs, which directly impact access. So, but before we come back to that, you've talked around a number of issues that I think that our next speaker, who runs an education institution, who experiences firsthand every day the challenges of teaching, getting teachers to deliver quality learning to the students, and making sure that the students who are left behind are brought on board and all the challenges she has to deal with. So I'd like to invite Ose to please explain to us and to the world and to Africa, what has it been running a learning institution at this time? What are the challenges? And then overall, how has the new normal impacted the different categories of learning institutions? You run a early stage primary and secondary school. What has been your experience?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Bosun. Good morning, panelists and everyone watching. I'm very happy to be here and lend my voice to something that's impacting everyone around the world. As you said, it's the new normal, and I don't want to belabor the problems and the challenges that we face in this new normal, because the speakers before me have done it enough justice. There are some other challenges we face as school owners. Of course, when you talk about the finances, you talk about teachers training and all of that. Those are the challenges. But for me, when we say new normal, I see the opportunities in it, not the challenges alone. Of course, there are challenges, but I think we should also shift our mindsets, because whether we like it or not, there's a shift happening in the world right now. The pandemic has forced a shift, and I think it's time that we start to embrace this shift. It's like the earth, whether you like it or not, it's going to rotate. You can't fight it. It will rotate. You can't even get off. It's the same situation we're facing here. A shift is happening. It's a generational shift. The way we learned in school, the way our parents learned, our children are not going to learn that way. So the onus is on us as adults first to unlearn what we've been taught all our lives and start to relearn new things. I'm sure most of us here are parents or teachers, so we've interacted with children. I would like to ask, has anyone ever sat their 2-year-old, even 1-year-old down and taught them how to use the iPad? I'm sure the answer is no. You don't teach children how to use the iPad. Even your phone, if they keep beside you long enough, they'll know your code, your password, and they can get into your phone and they can go to their games and help themselves. So I think the block, first of all, is from us adults, because we know we should, or we think we should learn this in this way to get this result, but it doesn't always follow. This shift is happening. I'll give you an example. In the past, we used to use paper CVs. Some people still do. Some people of our generation still do. But it'll interest you to know that the millennials don't use paper CVs anymore. They send in videos. So if I want to apply for a job at Digital Africa, I make a video presentation of myself, telling you what I can do, telling you what my skills are. and then I send it to you. So it's more interactive. You're able to read me and understand me better. And then when you have a conversation with me, it's more in-depth. Also, the example of advertisements. Newspaper adverts are still good, but you cannot compare the reach to social media. If you put your advertisement on social media, there is no limit to who can see that advertisement. People in Texas can see it. People in India can see it. People in Morocco can see it. So technology is breaking the boundaries that traditional methods have put for us. So we, as the institutions, service providers, we must step up to the plate, accept that this is the new normal. I don't have the internet or the infrastructure. That's up to the government, that's up to the service providers. But we have to change our mindset so that we can get on board with this change that is happening. Can the online and digital learning, traditional learning, the answer is no.
Yeah.
They complement each other. So there are people who would not have access, replace to online learning because of all the problems that are bound. So the traditional learning should still be there. We are not saying take it away. It should still remain. There are skills, valuable skills we gain from traditional learning methods in the classroom, social skills, and body language. It's a bit difficult and challenging to do that online.
Yeah.
So my message is we have to adjust our thinking. There has to be a paradigm shift to accept this new normal as part of education and provide so that education complements traditional education to play the saxophone. And of course, saxophone teachers are not everywhere. They're few and far between. What do I do if the only saxophone teacher that I know that's very good lives in I can go on YouTube. My son can learn to play the saxophone on YouTube. If my son wants to learn, because my son lives in Abuja, learn coding. Lots of the coding resources available to learn new skills. So in terms of this new normal, I think that in addition to the challenges, we should embrace the opportunities it brings. The teachers, I would call on all school owners and the government to train the teachers because, like you said, a lot of them are used to delivering their classes during span varies depending on their age group. To secondary students' attention span. So with that in mind, you make your class interactive. There are other ideas, if they go online, took a course at Harvard to increase my knowledge on how to engage the children during online classes. I can do that, but the teacher in the government school cannot do that because they cannot afford it. So it's up to the government to train their people so that we can deliver these lessons, because whether we like it or not, it is happening. As Karima said, children haven't gone to school since March. Millions of children, they haven't learned anything. The infrastructure to make it possible for them to be able to continue learning is traditional learning cannot be replaced by digital learning. I just want a situation where they complement each other.
Thank you so much, Ose. It's exciting to hear from someone who owns and runs the school. You're living the challenges every day. Thank you for what you do for millions, hundreds of kids out there. It's people like you, African kids have a future. Thank you so much. I would like to come back to you later on, Ose, so that you answer a specific question. There are tons of people in position of authority in government, in industry, what to do for schools to the new normal. My question to you, I'll come back in a bit, would be what exactly would you like to see government do or the industry do to assist school to wrap up on delivering quality education in the new normal? Now, before I come to you, I like to go to Dumebi. Now, I like to go to Dumebi because for people in the tech space, we've been talking about fourth industrial revolution, exponential technologies, and we've been saying they will impact every industry, and not least learning. And there are specific technologies that have been identified to make a huge difference: artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual robotics, whatever. You can pick any of them. And these ones I've mentioned down identify significant impact in learning. Okay? Is social learning. In future, by the time everywhere, perhaps we can deliver learning with the complete experience of a classroom, including the social. The technology space has also been pushed into these skills, sudden new normal, as against our projection that augmented reality, for example, will be available in every school. So, what solutions are there today? What can schools do today? And then, what is the future in terms of technology assisting learning from your experience?
Thank you very much, Bosun, and thank you so much to the panelists. So let me start by saying there are nice to haves, right? And there are practicable solutions in our environment. So the nice to haves are the artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, as you mentioned, right? Yes, the potential, the power of such innovation, innovative technologies to deliver good learning environment, deliver education is not in doubt. But the question is, to what degree, what's the reach? How many people will be covered? Considering in the context of Africa and in particular Nigeria. So today we have the quick fixes, what I would call it, quick fixes, adoption of online learning. I would say 20–30% of the schools in the metropolis. What happens to the child in the rural area? What happens to the child in that environment that you do not have electricity? Neither do they have smartphones, and they don't have network coverage, telco network coverage, and things like that. So that takes us to the two broad areas I want us to look at it from. One is education as business, and then of course is education as a social service. I will concentrate more on education as a social service. Now, today, with specific reference to Nigeria, you have about 170 lines, telco lines. And then we have, let's take an average of 2 lines per person. We're talking of about 75, 80 million phones. Out of that, you're talking about 35 million smartphones. The rest are feature phones. Is there a possibility that we can leverage USSD, what you call short codes, to provide learning to these children out there? Is there a possibility that we can do a combo of smart toys and smart games and distribute to these children? Because it has to be a multifaceted approach. and that's the reality. That's the situation we face as Africans and as Nigerians. So these kids must reach out to these kids, leveraging some of these technologies that are practicable in their environment, right? So it requires the government, it requires the private sector coming together to provide this infrastructure. Now, if you take it back to education as business, and of course, it's interesting what has happened in the cities. The schools have quickly adopted the online learning, but even within the metropolis, you still have a good number of students who are not able to latch on to this new, this first normal that we embrace today. So there has to be a combination of solutions. The online learning have been exhaustively discussed by Karima, Ose, and Doctor. And of course, everybody is forced to adapt. The child is forced to adapt. The teacher is forced to adapt, not so skilled in delivering digital content. And of course, it's also important at this point for us to look at context and content. There's so much rush around Edmodo, and of course, for obvious reasons, done on all those platforms. But how do we contextualize some of those platforms? How do we build our own content? The content that ensures we replicate to a large degree a classroom teaching, that tries to mimic a classroom teaching. It's tough, but it's doable. So it creates opportunities around the content developers. It creates opportunities around the telco, around the people who play in the technology industry. It creates opportunity for the government, because once we have bigger reach, of course, it's more numbers, better planning for the government. So as Ose rightly mentioned, there are huge opportunities, even though the challenges are humongous, but there are huge opportunities that the technology space can latch onto and provide good learning environment for our kids, both in urban cities and the rural environment.
Thank you very much. To maybe technology, learning as a social service, and then education as a business. That's a very, very nice way to put it. Now, of course, as a social service, we would rely a lot of people who do social businesses. Today there are a lot of commercial businesses that will tell you they are social entrepreneurs. And social entrepreneurship is also gaining ground. So perhaps education, servicing the education sector requires a new thinking, a new relearning, a new approach of complete social entrepreneurship outlook. Thank you very much, Dumebi, for that. I'd like to come back to Osa now. I asked the question earlier, and the question again is, as a business owner in the education space, what would you like specifically to see government or regulators do? This is your chance for a bailout campaign. This is your chance for a bailout
need that.
on behalf of your colleagues, right? So
Yes.
What would you like to see government and the regulators do specifically for that industry? And if you'd like to extend that to providers of services in education, that would be fine.
Yes, thank you very much, Bosun. There's a lot the government can do. There's a lot service providers can do, but I'll start from the government because everything behoves on them at the end of the day. First of all, like Dr. Sandeep had informed us earlier, unfortunately, he's not here to expand on it more. The cost of internet. Cost is a major factor why digital education is not available to everybody. And the cost ranges from the cost of your devices to the cost of the internet to everything else that is necessary for education to happen. So we have to tackle these one at a time. There's little the citizens can do if the government doesn't step in. I'll remind you of a time in Nigeria where we used to pay our phone bills per minute, not per second. We had just two providers at the time, I think MTN and Econet at the time. and it was about 65 naira. Whether you spoke for 10 seconds or you spoke for 60 seconds, you pay the same 65 naira. But as the industry started to grow and more players came in, of course, things changed and the price went down. We all know competition drives prices down. So the government needs to, first of all, start from there in terms of service providers. The entry limitations have to be revised. They have to invite more players into the industry. Now we can all count on our fingers how many internet service providers we have in Nigeria. It shouldn't be so. I assume it is not so in India. That's why their service is very cheap. So when we have more players, internet costs will go down. That's one cost out of the way. And that will be able to reach everyone in the country, not just middle class and up. Another thing the government can do for everyone, again, I'm not just speaking about private schools, is partnerships. So we can have public-private partnerships where because the private schools, we tend to have access to more funding, or maybe not that we have access, we manage our funding better. So we're able to get better value from whatever it is we have. So we can afford to send our teachers on trainings in Harvard. We can afford to, we have access to all of these things. So we have the knowledge. We would like to share it. I, for one, I would like to share my knowledge for free. I don't even have to charge. I want to train other teachers. So I would be very interested in public and private partnership where school owners like myself who have access to these Western and modern technology and all of that, the education, the training and all of that, I want to be able to pass on that knowledge to teachers in public schools so that we can impact beyond our own space, as Dumebi said, education as a public service, not just a business. And then for us, of course, as we're impacting, the government can do certain things for private schools to support them. For instance, access to loans. We should have good loan structures available to us. As the world is developing, as education is evolving, there are things we need to do. Sometimes we don't have the funds to do these things. If you go to a commercial bank, your interest rate starts from 25% and up with all the limitations that come with it. Schools should have access to good loan facilities, especially in this period. And the schools that have loans already running, the government needs to step in with the banks and ensure that we have good moratorium during this period. Nobody's, as Karima or someone said, no one is collecting the type of fees they were collecting before. Some schools are not collecting anything at all. I know of a school in Benin where the owner had just taken a commercial loan for expansion in her school because, of course, the school is growing, they need facilities. So she took a bank loan. And this happened, she just finished her renovation in February, hoping to recoup from the fees and everything that will come in third term. And alas, there was no third term. Her school is not for middle income. Her school is for low income families. So they had no access to internet education or online learning. So she has basically collected nothing since March or since January, because we collect fees in January. And the bank is on her to pay back, thinking of selling her property, thinking of selling her car, because she has to start making repayments. Some banks were good enough. I know GTB did a 6-month moratorium for some schools. 6 months is not enough because we've been at home for 6 months now, and we don't know how long we'll be at home for. So if my 6 months ended in July or in August, and I'm supposed to start repayments in September, how's that going to work? Where am I going to get the money from? So the government needs to step in to ensure that schools do not close down due to inability to repay their loans, inability to repay their teachers. They need to step in and bail out the schools one way or another. Provide loans, long-term loans. We're not talking 2 years, long-term loans that the schools can plan on. And so that we can also give back in our own way. So I think these are some of the ways that the government can help us and the service providers can help us as well. Just a quick one. I know they also did this Empower project one time. So we can do things like that, provide digital tools for the teachers, train them on how to use it so that the children in public schools can have access as well, because COVID-19 didn't give us time to prepare. And there had been a gap already between children that go to private schools and children that go to public schools. Now, COVID-19 has widened that gap, and it will continue to widen if the government does not step in. And lastly, if I would just like to add again, since it's my one chance, let me use it. The government should not limit the private schools that can afford to do online learning just because public schools cannot do it, because it feels like the government was holding back private schools. Private schools were ready to forge on with online learning. Many of their children had access to it, and the government comes out with a regulation and says, don't do third term, put third term on hold until we're all ready to do third term. And these children are sitting at home, they have the iPad, they have the internet service. Instead of learning, they were playing games and playing at home just because the government says don't do third term. So those type of regulations don't help us. Yes, we understand that the low-income families don't have access to this, but I don't think it's fair to deprive everyone just because the government hasn't provided infrastructure for the low-income families. So please, let us keep learning. That's my message today.
Thank you very much, Ose. You had a one chance, and believe me, you
I use it.
Thank you so much. You're giving us a lot to ponder on and act on. I would like to assure you, in the usual practice of Digital Africa, your comments, your position would be delivered and expressed to the highest levels of authorities in throughout Africa, and African leaders will be looking at this. Now, just to extend that line of thought, I know Karima has been itchy. This, like I said at the beginnings, is the space for women. Learning, teaching, growing, it's women are just the best at doing this. Karima, you are very passionate about youths, all right? And learning, every time you talk about learning, the default is children and youth, because that's the stage where you are like a sponge. You really, really absorb so much. What should a young person be preparing to do or be doing at this time? As we all know, there is the talk around a possibility of a second wave. We don't know how long this will last. We don't know if next time in Africa there will be this again. So I would like you to please quickly, in 1 minute, we're running out of time. Give us a sense of what young people should be doing to take advantage of the new normal in learning.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. First of all, I just want to emphasize that digital tools or platforms or distance learning is just a tool, not the end itself. I think the problem during this time, as we are not prepared enough, we're caught by the surprise that we focused more on the tools rather than the pedagogy, rather than the education system itself that needs to be changed. And I think here there are many opportunities, as we saw many young people are innovative enough to create digital platforms based on the evaluation of the distance learning that was provided by different governments to adapt those platforms to the needs of young people. And I think this is so smart. We need to encourage social entrepreneurship in the field of education. And we have a lot of young innovators in Africa who created very, very adaptable platforms in terms of that. And they have provided it even for free for both teachers and students to finish their education, and they trained them on that. I think the opportunities are important here. And in terms of, I want to outline it for three major points. First of all, is capacity building. I think we need to promote a digital mindset because we're not yet ready yet. So digital mindset, this is for both for government officials, for teachers, and also students, and also for teacher parents association. This is first. Second, I think we need to advocate to move from teachers to move teachers or transform teachers from lecturers to coach, because the young people receive information differently online. So I think the way we're dealing with education online is very different. In terms of pedagogy, I think we need to take into consideration this digital transformation, and also artificial intelligence, because there are many studies stating that in the next 10 years there will be more than 300 million jobs that will be lost all across the world because of artificial intelligence. So we need to include different ways to adapt and to make young people more employable for the future. And I want to share a little experience here. Many people, young people, during this period lost their jobs. A lot, millions of Africans lost their jobs. We are creating an initiative so that young people will not be living in a status quo, because we're going to live with this virus for a long time. Many African countries are going back to lockdown. So how are we going to help these young people to live, but also to finish their education? Is that many young people during this period of time discovered they have a lot of talents, different other talents. So the idea here is to use entertainment education, using the talents of these young people to monetize their talents online, providing them with an opportunity to share their talents and expertise and teach online and gain money from teaching online while monitoring their own schedule. In that way, we are temporarily, helping these young people not to be jobless, finding opportunities online, sharing their knowledge with other young people. So process, but also we're teaching them how to monetize their talents, because many, they have degrees, they have certification, they have their own way of teaching, and they use gamification, they use different other digital tools in teaching, adapted to this generation Y that is socially engaged. We're talking today about social distancing, but I'm stating that this is physical distancing, because young people are already socially engaged in digital platforms and in social media platforms. The last point is to help teacher parents associations and students associations to advocate for public dialogue and consultation with governments, so that their input and evaluation of the current education system will be taken into consideration in recognizing distance learning, and also changing the pedagogy of learning so that it could be adapted to them. As doctor said, it should be students focus and not teacher focus.
Thank you very much, Karima. As we round off, I would like all the panelists in 30 seconds to prepare give us your final thoughts. If there are questions and answers, I know there are a couple already. I'd like for us to take one or two. My colleagues would assist us in the background to highlight what those questions are. As those come on board, I would like to ask Doctor, who is here with me in the studio, to give us his final thought, unless, of course, there are questions that come that you need to speak to. One of the things I would like someone to address, perhaps, in the final thought, is the challenge of people with disability and then children requiring assistance. The general principle, most people with a permanent disability will require assistance throughout their learning. But for regular kids who don't have a permanent disability, from time to time, we'll see kids who require assisted learning at different phases of their learning life. So if you'd like to mention that as part of your closing remark, that would be good. But I would like to see this new normal. Should they, how would they be part of the equation and the entire thought process? Dr. Victor, please.
Let me try addressing the issue of people with assisted learning. I know a lot can be done. In my primary office, the Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council, we have a Braille press that is thoroughly equipped and well manned. So such a place could be encouraged to start thinking in this direction. And I know that people who are visually impaired have access to cell phones, and there are mechanisms in which they can type. I'm sure that those can be successfully transformed into learning experience for them. But my last thoughts on what should be done, starting from the most important, is that tech companies shouldn't just stay away and concentrate on the idea of providing platforms. Meanwhile, they are the ones who have the bulk of the money. And in the end, they will make more money from it. So I think there should be something they should do, which is to have greater interface with curriculum developers and designers and other stakeholders in education, such that they can help them structure pedagogy in such a way that they can help learners to get properly engaged in e-learning and be e-learning compliant. I think that's the most important takeaway from here. Then the other is in terms of, for those of us who are in the classrooms, who have direct interaction with the students. Assessment needs to change. Bearing in mind that all these challenges are there, stopping people or reducing their ability to learn. So pedagogy assessment should go beyond the issue of grading as we know it, to having a designed assessment system which ensures that students retain interest in education, cut off anxieties that come with not being able to do well when you know that you ought to do well. So that is very essential. The others have been mentioned, but for the purpose of my own background, let me say that emphasis should shift from coverage of curriculum. Curriculum is designed for a term, and most teachers are far more interested in making sure that they run through the curriculum, no matter what time frame is allowed. I think we should play down on that curriculum coverage and take a step further, which is the in thing in e-learning, to discover the potentials of students and make sure that resources for them to get those potentials properly engaged are available to them. And in this space, the teacher should go beyond a teacher to being a guide.
So that would be a good place to leave it, Dr. Victor. Thank you very much. Do maybe please 30 seconds. We really are out of time. I'm not sure we can take those questions if we can, but please 30 seconds. Your closing thoughts.
Thank you so much. I think the most important thing is for us to appreciate the level of disruption this has caused. Over 1.6 billion people are disrupted in terms of learning across the world. So the number saying that goes that you can't solve the problem with the same mindset it was created. So it requires a complete rethinking process. It requires the government, it requires the educationists, it requires businessmen, it requires people who play in the technology space to come together to create a multifaceted solution towards solving this, because it cuts across the government, it cuts across the private sector, it cuts across practically everything that we do in this particular sector. So it requires a complete rethinking process towards solving this particular problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dumebi. Karima, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think there are two things. Encourage students' associations to be part of the policy-making process in building more inclusive digital policies and also education. And the last point is to encourage and promote youth entrepreneurship in the education sector.
Those are the panelists. I'll just like on behalf of Ose to say that she made a lot of points around intervention required for schools, for students, for teachers, and also volunteered their time to be able to provide what they've learned in the private sector and share this with teachers who teach millions of children in the public sector. And we didn't get to hear from Dr. Sandeep, and as we close and I introduce the panelists again, Dr. Sandeep is a lecturer at the American University of Nigeria, a renowned scholar One of the things he shared with us just before this session started, unfortunately, he couldn't join the session, was that the cost of access of bandwidth from the vivid illustration he gave to us, it is clear why and until and unless Africa fix that challenge, it will be very difficult for Africa to compete with kids from India in the long run. The reason? It costs a child about 300 times more to get the same amount of data for learning in Africa as would in India. That was his submission to us earlier, and he gave a clear illustration to support that. So thank you very much, Dr. Sandip. Thank you very much, Karima. Karima is a multi-award winner, passionate about children, and founder of Africa My Home. Thank you very much, Ose. Ose runs the school, CEO, Alderwood International Schools. Thank you very much, Dr. Victor. I'm privileged to share the studio with you, legal advisor, education and development, so a part du mobility, tech education, here, Digital Africa. We've looked at the future of learning, the new normal, and please watch out for this. Africa will be doing the mobility that have been proposed at this session. Thank you and God bless. Since the live welcome to this fireside chat with one of Africa's most distinguished leaders in business, in regulation, and in telecom administration. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I will be introducing shortly our guests at this session. But before I do that, just to remind our viewers and participants at the 2020 Digital Africa's Conference and Exhibition, my name is Bosun Ayeni. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Compumetrics and a board member at Digital Africa. Back to our guest. So our guest is someone that needs no introduction. But for the benefit of those of us who are online, I would like to say that our guest is a professional telecoms engineer, practiced telecoms engineering in the corporate environment, an entrepreneur, and a business management training of over 38 years with international Pan-African experience and local experience here in Nigeria. He is very well known for his role as the Executive Vice Chairman of Nigerian Telecommunication Commission, an agency he anchored and ran from year 2000 rather, and to become a leading and highly respected global regulator throughout the world. He has developed a foundation that his successors are riding on, and today NCC still remains a pride of Africa when it comes to telecoms regulation. Today, based on his pedigree and reach, he was recently appointed and still occupies the office of the chairman of MTN Nigerian Communication PLC. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Dr. Ernest Ndukwe, OFR. Dr. Ndukwe, you're welcome to this fireside chat.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So like I said to you backstage just before we started, it's really a privilege for Africa to hear from you again. You're someone we used to see and hear from a lot when you were a regulator. But now, since you've been taking the role of assisting MTN board, leading the MTN board, yeah, we know you're doing that for MTN Nigeria. But a lot of people are wondering, what else have you been doing? We know that you're a very busy person, but since you left the public eyes, we're wondering, are you now completely a private person, or are there other public ventures you still spend time to do?
Yes, thank you very much. I have done quite a few things. When I left the NCC, I set up a consulting firm, which I've been running since then. I also tried to venture briefly into politics because I thought that people like me needed to be involved in somehow the governance of this country. But it didn't work out the way I thought. So I went back to the place I'm more accustomed to, which is a professional life and running my consultancy firm. And that has kept me quite busy all these years until I was invited to a number of boards. I used to be on the board of Access Bank for some years. And then, of course, board of Open Media Communications and a few other smaller companies. There is also some international company called ICT Africa, which is based in South Africa. I'm also still on the board of that. And then very recently appointed to the MTN board. I must say that I refused for many years to get involved in any telco because I decided of my own volition to give myself a long period of absence. And but despite the fact that I was being lobbied by a number of companies to come on board, but telecom is the only area that I know best. And then after about 8-9 years of, shall I call it sabbatical or not being involved, I decided now to accept the invitation from MTN to join their board. So that's what I've been doing so far.
Thank you very much. Your story, your journey, although today we are focusing on 5G and the way forward for Africa, but I would like to extract a commitment from you now. African young people are listening, everybody's looking at you, who would like to have another session with you, with a lot of young people who would like to hear your story in detail so that you can be an inspiration to them and they can learn, understand your entire journey, and perhaps those who want to be on that journey can then take a thing or two from that. You wouldn't mind for us to organize that?
No, it will be my pleasure. It's actually a big interest of mine to see to the development of the next generation. So I've done it a few times before, and anything that will motivate young people is always a pleasure for me to do. So please, I'll be available whenever you are.
Excellent. And on that note, of course, let's now dive deep into your core area of what you know, as you put it. The trending issue now. Today, we are talking about the new normal. COVID-19 has changed the landscape for pretty much everything. The way we live, the way we work, the way we play. Pretty much everything, the way we learn. And one of the biggest technology that is driving what the entire fourth industrial revolution has to offer is 5G. We hear 5G all the time. And there is no better person to ask this question, Dr. Ndukwe. What exactly is 5G?
Okay, thank you very much. Like you said, it is the next big thing in wireless technology space. Every subsequent generation of wireless networks delivers faster speed and more functionalities for a mobile phone. 1G was the first generation devoted to analog voice calls. And then 2G is the digital and has enabled digital and enabled text messaging for the first time. Then we moved on from there to 3G, which enabled online data and internet on mobile. Of course, we moved on to 4G, which enabled over 10 times higher speeds compared to 3G. So as more users come online, it's being speculated that 4G networks are fast approaching their limits with respect to how much capacity and speed that it can handle. So 5G was then developed to meet this challenge. So in summary, 5G is the technology of the 2020s and will be able to handle up to 1,000 times the traffic of today's 4G networks and about 10 to 100 times the speed. So it's actually a very important technology for the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndukwe. So if I permit me to paraphrase 5G, the G there, generation, of course.
Yeah.
So, as an average user of a mobile phone, what I hear you say is that in 5G era, I'll be able to download that video 10 to 100 times faster than I currently do.
That's right. That is very right.
That's something to look forward to, isn't it?
It is something very exciting. And many of the new technological developments are actually going to depend on 5G for them to be successful.
Great. So, talking of which, as this development comes, of course, the 5G network itself needs to be available. So, what exactly is the status of 5G implementation in Nigeria, Africa, or the rest of the world? Is it likely that 5G implementation will go in diverse direction like we saw in your early days with CDMA, most of Europe doing GSM, and the US continent deploying CDMA before we saw a convergence? So are we seeing the diversification of opinion or approach in the rollout of 5G locally? I mean, globally, locally and globally.
Okay. You know, there is a big race for 5G today. Countries that want to stay competitive in the global economy are adopting 5G technology at an increasingly rapid pace. Some people who have been current with news would have known that Donald Trump, President Trump, sometime last year, declared that 5G is a race the United States of America must win. Over the years, American companies and wireless operating companies have been leading in early development and deployment of wireless communications technology. In fact, it might be interesting to know that the first portable phone was developed in the US. However, other countries seem to be seriously contesting the lead in 5G development. Countries such as Korea, China, and of course the United States are countries that lead the world in building and deploying 5G technology. So coming home to Africa, Nigeria in particular has tested, we conducted a test for 5G some months ago before the COVID lockdown. And it was done by MTN and was widely advertised. But let it be said that it was only a trial. And there's no 5G network in Nigeria today as we speak. Because what we did was, together with Nigerian Communications Commission and the Ministry of Communications, Technology, and Digital Economy, we conducted those trials in about 3 cities in Nigeria, just to give a flavor about what 5G would be like in terms of speed of delivery and things like that. But let it be said that today, Nigeria is still not fully planted with 4G technology all across Nigeria. So that is the focus of many of the telcos today. But I'd like to say that, quite honestly, whether we like it or not, we must deploy 5G in the medium to long term from now. Because if we want to be at pace with other countries of the world and not continue to be laggards as we have been in embracing other technologies, will also have issues. So, but it has to be led by the regulatory authorities, giving the go-ahead, providing us with the opportunity of acquiring the right spectrum to be able to deploy 5G technology and things of that nature. So it's something that will happen. I know that countries like South Africa are also looking at that. They've also done trial runs on 5G and the like. So that is ongoing at the moment. What's happening? What's happening? Is there a problem? Eh? Me? Wow. I wonder what happened. Are we back? Hello? You can see me? I've been on since though.
Hello. Hello, Dr. Ndekwe. This is exactly why we are having this conversation. Okay, please unmute your mic. Please unmute your mic. Yes, yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Please unmute your mic.
Oh.
Okay, great, great. So we hear you now. You know, this is exactly why we are having this conversation, because because
I
of the
wonder
network.
what happened. I was talking, I didn't even know the line had cut.
I noticed here that the line had cut and the tech team had to quickly reconnect you back. I'm not quite sure where the disconnection or the network challenge came from, this end, somewhere in between. But we're back now and we can continue with our conversation.
No problem.
So you were telling us about the MTN trial in Nigeria, in Lagos
Yes.
and Abuja, and you made the point that it is a trial and that there is absolutely no active 5G network in Nigeria at the moment.
At the moment, that's true. And I also said that I'm aware that in the Republic of South Africa, that they also perform some trials on 5G, and maybe one or two other spots around the continent. So in Africa, it's mostly trials. But in Europe, some deployments have started. Of course, in China, in Korea, and the US, for that matter. As you know, China seems to be very much ahead of the pack in terms of technology development. And I think also South Korea is also very much advanced in that area. And then the other countries are trying their best. Europe, some countries in Europe, and the US. So it's a big, big issue. It's actually almost going to become a political issue. And one of the worrisome trends in the world is all kinds of conspiracy theories have started coming up about 5G and whether it has anything to do with coronavirus and all.
COVID-19.
COVID-19. And it was making me very unhappy when some of our citizens were almost in arms against the deployment of 5G. And my word to such people is that with every technology development, there is always this fear about health issues. And that has not stopped the deployment of these networks. And till to date, we've not seen many people dropping dead on the streets because of deployment of this technology. But all I can assure people is just like flying an aeroplane. If you have faith that the plane will take off and land, then you enter the aeroplane. For 5G technology, to the best of my knowledge, no telecom operator in the world today will ever try to launch a network if they are not certain of the safety of the networks. So that is the truth of the matter. And safety is of paramount importance to all telcos around the world. And myself, as chairman of MTN Nigeria, will never subscribe to any network that will bring hardship or bring a threat to the health of the citizens of the country. So the truth is that 5G will be deployed, and with all the necessary health safeguards that are important to make sure that our citizens are protected and that there's nothing untoward that will happen to us. Thank you.
So, Dr. Ernest, is this safe? Is it safe to say then that the delay in the rollout of 5G globally, there are pockets of commercial rollout, maybe one or two major commercial rollout, pretty much everywhere else has been testing and test pilot cases. Is it safe to say the delay is as a result of these health concerns? Now, generally, in the long run, almost every wireless infrastructure, long exposure in the long term to almost every wireless infrastructure has some health concerns. And experts like you, in fact, the other time, about 180 scientists and doctors made a presentation to the European Union, making a case about the potential hazards of 5G. And some others will say that having young people and very old people exposed to 5G network over a long period due to the power transmission capabilities of 5G radios could present some potent health issues over a long exposure period. So is that why we're having delays in the rollout? Because the entire industry is trying to find solutions to addressing some of these health concerns before we go full-blown commercial?
No, that is definitely not the case. I would like to remind our viewers about what happened in Europe when it was time to deploy 3G technology. First of all, the cost of deployment is usually of concern to telcos. 3G came about 2 years late because many of the telcos spent so much money buying the 3G spectrum that they did not have money to roll out networks. So it took over 2 years, even in the UK, before the telcos started rolling out 3G, which is the forerunner of 4G. So, first of all, for networks to be deployed, one of the lifeblood of any telecom network is spectrum, frequency spectrum. If the frequency is not there, there will be no deployment. Today, many countries have not even done the auction for 5G spectrum for them to have the spectrum to roll out the network. Only the very advanced countries have gone ahead because of the race for the potential benefits of 5G. They've gone ahead to roll out. For instance, in Africa, no countries have actually given out spectrum for 5G network. And some parts of the world also. So it's not necessarily because of health concerns, no. Let me not sound as if I am supporting rollout of 5G sheepishly. Of course, it will take another year or two before Nigeria will start considering whether we are rolling out 5G or not. But let it be said that 5G is a necessary forward movement for ICT industry in the world today. And that the fear is because of the millimeter wave that is used for 5G deployment. And not all 5Gs will be deployed in the millimeter wave area. And secondly, like I said previously, if it's not safe, nobody will deploy it. If it's not safe, nobody will subject their citizens to the hazards. And quite honestly, it's just work in progress. But to answer your question clearly, it's not because of health issues or health concerns. 5G deployment is still work in progress. There are organizations like International Telecoms Union that get involved in setting standards for deployment of technology. They are working hard to make sure that the right protocols are observed and that they issue guidelines on a regular basis, like what WHO has been doing for the COVID-19 era. The issue is that President Trump will not be fighting over supremacy of 5G if the citizens of America will be subjected to death and deprivation. The truth is that it's a technology that is going to improve many aspects of our lives, and that it must be done in a very safe and safety will be the paramount importance as far as deployment of 5G is concerned. And there are regulatory bodies all over the world that will not in any way support any deployment that will result in health hazards to the citizens of that country. And ditto for Nigeria, that if Nigeria does not convince itself that it's safe for deployment in Nigeria, Nigeria will not deploy. And that is the truth of the matter.
Thank you very much again. But before we leave the area of safety and politics, I would take one controversial issue around 5G. As you are aware, a lot of international politics around 5G and issues pertaining to national security. And just like you said, if it's deployed around the millimeter wave, and also the challenges with what some presidents have called the China 5G has not been so safe, and trying to persuade other countries. You know, the UK government received some pressures not to deploy 5G from some other countries. So is this safe? Are there any potential national security issues with relying on some countries or relying on third-party countries to deploy this technology? Because that's some of the arguments we're hearing in the political space. Because you mentioned politics, I said, okay, let's hear your thoughts on this.
Quite honestly, 5G deployment portends a lot of what I call quite honestly, is a money issue as well as politics. As I said in some of my opening remarks, I observed that America has always been the lead in deployment of some of these technologies. Mobile phones to the world. America also introduced internet to the world. But it seems that some other nations have come of age. So in the deployment, in the research and development associated with 5G, for some reason, China went ahead of the pack. And let me say why I say some of it is money matters. According to estimates published in an informal tech research paper, 5G technology could be responsible for 22.3 million jobs and about 13 trillion of global economic output by 2035. So America does not want to lose out on that potential. So when they are talking about national security, I'm not too sure. It might be true to a large extent, but I don't know. There is this suspicion between China and the US about issues of spying, issues of the fact that there's a lot of stealing of technology information, and the fact that they are suspecting that since Huawei is taking the lead, I'm sorry to mention the name of the company, since this Chinese company is taking the lead in this 5G deployment, it seems that the powers that be in the Western world are not too comfortable and then start talking about security implications of the technology. This had been flatly denied by these companies in China, but the suspicion persists. I personally have not researched it.
Thank you.
To know whether it's true or not. So,
Okay.
but I think it's more economic than fear of security issues.
Well, you would agree with me that in the final analysis, the economic viability of every country is still a security issue at the end of the day. So let's come back home. Let's come back home to Africa and our ability to roll out 5G. Yes, you said the potential for 5G can be $13 trillion globally, and that today is about 13 times the GDP of Africa. Now, of course, rolling out the network requires a lot of investment. What chunk of this will Africa be positioned to take? And to take it, it means we need to roll out 5G networks or partake at least in 5G networks. So what will it cost to roll out, say, 5G throughout Africa, or perhaps in a capital, in a federal capital like Abuja? What will it cost to just a ballpark figure roll out 5G network? What kind of investment are we talking about?
I'm sorry, I will not be able to give you numbers, largely because we've not really started doing those sums. We have to walk before we run. The country has to be ready for 5G first before we start talking about estimates of how much it will cost. But let it be said that just like 4G was deployed in Nigeria, 5G will be deployed by the private operating company. So the federal government would not need to worry about the cost of deployment of 5G. The federal government would be more concerned about how much revenue that will bring in terms of revenue industry. As you know, ICT today has added about 12% to the GDP of Nigeria only recently. And that is the bottom line that we are talking about. That non-deployment of 5G in future will further widen the digital divide between us and the more advanced countries of the world. Because our lives, I don't think, is more important than the lives of those in the US and in China, places like that. So we have to be careful about how far we go about this issue of saying that we're not going to deploy 5G. If we don't deploy 5G, we will lose out on that $13 trillion of global economic output that is estimated to happen by 2035. We will also be losing out on the 22 million jobs that 5G is likely to create around the world. So the issue here is that it will lead to, I must say, capital flight. It will lead to many of our people, our young people, relocating to other parts of the world, because the world is today a global village. And many of our people might even be here developing 5G kits for global companies like Microsoft, Google, and all that, and doing their own thing and leaving us if we don't want to follow the way the world is going. So it is important that while people talk about 5G, let them leave the experts to look at this thing together with government and the regulatory bodies and make sure that 5G is deployed when it's safe and good to deploy 5G, and when it is not too late for us to join the global race with the rest of the world.
So talking about the concerns for government, at one of our earlier sessions, even today at Digital Africa, one of the concerns that were raised around cost is the cost of delivery of broadband, something you passionately pursued while you were at the helm of regulation in Nigeria. One of our speakers did make the point that overall it costs about 200 to 300 times more in Nigeria to get data for learning as it would in his native country of China. He gave two major reasons that he thinks are responsible for that. One is the number of operators, and then the second is the issue of access. Now, if 5G comes, there is the promise of 5G that it can deliver broadband the way we expect it. But cost and affordability is still an issue. Do you think, sir, that Africa and maybe Nigeria should wait until 5G comes before broadband will become affordable and competitive like the rest of the world, or it will happen in this 4G era?
Thank you for that question, actually, because it's at the root of everything in the ICT industry today. I left NCC about 10 years ago. Before then, during my tenure, we were doing everything possible to convince our political leaders, the governors, about the importance of deploying optic fiber cable massively across the length and breadth of this country. In fact, if you go back to one of my papers around 2007, 2008, I talked about deploying fiber all around Africa, and especially Nigeria. But it was impossible to get permits to deploy these things around. My brother, without optic fiber installation massively across Nigeria, both for metropolitan network in big cities and for interstate networks across the country, we can never enjoy 5G the way other countries are enjoying it today. In India, one company carpeted the whole of India with optic fiber cable. I know during my tenure that a company offered to install without any money from anywhere, install optic fiber cable all around the city of Lagos at their own cost, because they could project ahead and they knew that a time will come as this, where broadband will be the issue and the telcos will need optic fiber cable to be able to deliver broadband services. So it was heartwarming recently when I heard in the news that the Minister of Works, together with some governors, are talking about waiving the right-of-way charges for the next 2 years. Right-of-way charges for installation of fiber. That is, it was like music in my ears. Because with that, all these people saying that is a fraction of what is happening in their country, everything depends on the taxation in your country, how much the state governments charge for you to install fiber across their states. When you charge high right-of-way charges, deployment is slow and you will not get the full benefits of that deployment. So the issue here is that we need to crash the cost of broadband, and it has to start with government. And I must commend the Minister of Communications, Technology, and Digital Economy, because he's one of those championing this issue about reducing right-of-way charges so that Nigeria will take its position in the Committee of Nations. If that is done in the next 2 or 3 years, we won't be saying this thing we're saying, because the money is there. There are private companies that are ready to start deploying this fiber optic around. Even when you have your tower projecting radio transmission to your cell phone, it must have a fiber to the base station in order for the speed to be good enough for your mobile device. If you still depend on radio, you still have the challenges we're having today. So most telcos are now installing fiber to base stations, all in the way of improving the speed of broadband. Because today we're a mobile country. We depend on portable devices for most of our broadband usage in the country today. So fiber deployment is critical. And I think what government is talking about, the Minister of Digital Communications, Technology, and Digital Economy, the Minister of Works, and some progressive governments. In fact, I learned Anambra State, for instance, has waived completely right-of-way charges. So the issue today is, once these are in place, if we start discussing this in 1 year's time, we'll be singing a new song. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndukwe. Absolutely true. A number of governors, I think Ekiti was the first to go public, Anambra, Kwara, Kaduna, and a host of other states in Nigeria followed suit with either complete eradication or a major
reduction, very true,
of the right-of-way fees. Yes. So absolutely relevant. But you're talking about the role of the Minister of Communication and Digital Economy, and the dynamics of investment of 5G network and network generally is changing. Would you want to advise the government, regulator, and the policy at the minister and presidential level to consider allowing roaming on 5G network, considering the cost implication, considering the fact that we now need a network that is truly easy and available for people to use? Would you want them to consider open network services for 5G, inter-network roaming for data services?
Quite honestly, anything is possible provided you carry the industry along with you. You're very right that the cost of deployment of 5G would be enormous because you need many more base stations than what we have today. In fact, by the order of 10 times. So it will require a lot of investment. And suggestions of that nature might be a way to go. All these are things that the regulator and the policymakers would get involved with the private operators, like I always did when I was a regulator. You go and have open discussion and consultation with the industry. And then everybody will be aligned and they will come up with exactly what is best for the industry. So that is definitely a possibility.
Great, great. Okay, so Doctor, before we leave the industry and players, you talked about the many benefits of 5G. We know almost everything smart people say today would benefit significantly from 5G network. Smart learning, smart health, smart living, smart building, and so on. So the challenge and question, Dr. Ndukwe, I can still see and hear you clearly. Can you hear
listening.
me?
Listen.
Okay, great. So the question for the Nigerian and African tech entrepreneurs, especially those who play in the telco value chain. We have the big operators who clearly would participate in rolling out the network. But what aspect of the value chain going forward would you want to challenge young entrepreneurs and small to medium-sized companies in that space to focus on and take advantage of? As you know, it's a tough call to ask a startup company to take on MTN, which you chair.
You're very correct. Companies like MTN employ the services of hundreds of small companies all over. You'll be surprised that value-added services providers at one time, some of them were netting turnovers of 5 billion a year and things like that. You will have base station installations, radio network installations, and the like. And let me say that when people do research and development, they'll come with some good thing that they can come up with that might be of interest to the large operators. Or they might come up with a technology that will make large operators redundant after a while. Technology just moves on. Nobody can predict what will happen in the next 5 years. You know, so the truth of the matter is that there are hundreds of companies. They might not be that visible to everyone, but there are many, many companies that are making very good business of their own, you know, doing wonderful things in the ICT industry today, even when you see the big 4 or big 5 companies in the country. It's the same thing all over the world. In the US, you hear about AT&T, you hear about this other company or the other. In the UK, it's the major companies you hear about. But under them, there are many technology companies that are providing vital services. We do a lot of work in the ICT area. even in the MTN. And many technology companies are involved in that. And people just have to do their own homework and find where they'll fit in the value chain to be able to deliver services, both for themselves and for the big companies that are playing at this time.
Now, talking about research, Dr. Ndukwe, and what people need to do. For young people, are there, you've alluded to some, okay? So let me acknowledge first that you've alluded to the fact that young people might want to consider skills in maths, value-added services, and those kind of areas. But for a lot of young people still, I would like you to then address this question specifically. What skills do young people need to begin to acquire that will make them relevant in the 5G era, and then also relevant to themselves as potential entrepreneur or people who can start up the real big next idea for the 5G network, or like you said, make the big telco players redundant in future, who knows?
The first thing is that the person must be sufficiently IT savvy. I might not be able to mention all the skills, but these days, there are various companies in Nigeria that are seriously involved in developing IT skills. There are companies like Andela that are doing some good things in developing ICT manpower and even feeding countries outside Nigeria, not just for consumption of companies within the Nigerian space. Everything that we use today, even for switches and for software, everything, very relevant IT skills are very important. Of course, people need to be able to be very comfortable with the various new technologies in the area. You have to know, today, people even start learning how to code from a very young age. And the reason is that that is where the world is going. People need to know how to build softwares. People need to know how to develop apps. All the languages that are involved in those developments. Anybody seeking to know what to do, the information is out there in the open. I think all they need to do is open up their laptops or cell phone and do some research about the trending technologies of today. And I must warn that these technologies change almost on a daily basis. When I was in the university in the 70s, the computer that we had in those days always filled a whole, almost a hall. And those computers were doing, some of them not as much as the regular mobile phone is doing today. So technologies are continuously evolving. The language in those days was Fortran 4, Fortran this. Today, there are many more modern languages that are coming up. And that makes some of us look as if we didn't go to school again. So the issue here is that people have to absorb. And if you look at many companies today, they're actually employing teenagers and very young people to crack some of these technology issues and build softwares and even do ethical hacking and things like that. That is what is happening in many organizations today. So it's a, let me say, it's an era for young people. The younger you are and trained, the easier for you to be able to adapt to new technology. And I must also wonder, today it doesn't matter you are in. You need to have some basic knowledge of ICT. We call young people ICT natives because they can use their devices and do wonderful things that many older people cannot do. So I know many of these young people you're talking about know more of these technologies than myself in terms of what the right technologies are in use today in the various technology. And there are many organizations that are offering courses in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ndukwe. We're moving on to the last part of our chat. I'd like to take your predictions at this point. We've looked at the 5G network, what it will take, what the challenges are, and the promise that it's not a function of if. 5G in Africa, it's about when, not if. So I'd like to then ask you, which country and when do you see the first major commercial rollout in Africa for 5G? And who will be the operator that will get it done? Your prediction.
In Africa, you mean?
In Africa, yes.
Quite honestly.
So when will it happen, and who will be the operator we should be looking to get it done?
As you know, MTN operates in about 19 countries in Africa and counting. MTN is very active in South Africa. MTN is also active in Ghana. MTN is also very active in Cote d'Ivoire and a number of West African countries. So also a few other operators like Airtel and the like. The truth of the matter is that the country that will brace the tape first will be the country that the regulatory bodies become most prepared to open the window or the doors for 5G to enter. And I wouldn't want us to be laggards in Nigeria. One of the pains that I had when I assumed office, in fact, before I assumed office as EVC of NCC, was that a country like Cameroon rolled out GSM before Nigeria. Countries like Tunisia and North Africa did their auction for 2G before Nigeria. And I suspect even Ghana. So everything would depend on government policy and government regulatory decisions, that if other countries, not to talk of South Africa started GSM almost a decade before Nigeria. So, and they are in the race today, just like in the race in the advanced countries. We also have an African race today. And South Africa is not playing. They're actually looking at rollout very fast future. So my guess is that it will either be South Africa, Nigeria, or Ghana will be the first to roll out. Take example, for instance, we are still talking about mobile money today. Nigeria remains one of the countries that has not embraced it because of regulatory restrictions. Kenya did it. Ghana did it 10 years ago. Kenya did it ages ago. It depends on the regulatory environment that we operate. Once we set our people free, once we embrace changes that are necessary, things will go very fast. And that is the truth of the matter.
Okay, Doctor, let's still focus on your home country, Nigeria. And I know we're discussing Pan-Africa. You mentioned countries. You didn't say which operator. I would leave that. I would assume that you would not mention any other operator but MTN that will do it in those countries. So we just take that as a given. That would be your response.
I told you MTN is the 19 countries.
So we just
19 countries in Africa.
Well, okay. So we'll take that as and counting still. Okay. So we'll just take that as your response. But what would you like to see as a former regulator? What would you like to see if there is one actionable thing you would like regulators to do as a matter of urgency? What would it be? The regulator of Nigeria, for example, and the policymaker, if there is an action you would like to see taken in order to move 5G forward now, what would you like to see?
I'd like to mention 2 or 3 things. But the one that I mentioned before, which is eliminating right-of-way charges across the country. Because 5G cannot thrive without optic fiber cable. So if we don't do the general planting of optic fiber cable around the country, because 5G is radio, but a link is as strong as its weakest link. Once we don't have that high capacity infrastructure that is represented by optic fiber cable, 5G will just be a mirage as far as I'm concerned. So it is important to embrace, to do that removal of subsidy. And the minister, like I said, has been championing that removal of right-of-way, not subsidy, I'm sorry. The minister and some of other ministers and governors are championing that because I think they are forward-looking. Number 2 is that the regulator must, as at today, start thinking of the spectrum that 5G will require and start looking at giving out the spectrum as soon as possible so that people can start planning ahead of time. And then thirdly, it's also a step that the minister and people in the industry have taken, which is the broadband plan that was recently launched. The implementation of that broadband plan is critical.
Okay. Dr. Ndukwe, we have just about 2 minutes to go, but I would just like to bring it to your attention that our viewers, at least one Olushola particularly, Teniola, is making the case that we should watch out for Vodacom. Perhaps they will beat MTN to the race for 5G, because he's pointing at what they are doing in Lesotho, or what they did in Lesotho in 2008, and what they are doing in South Africa and so on. So I'm just telling you so that your board is hereby notified that Vodacom is that the race to the tape is on, and Vodacom might just beat you to it. But before you leave, I would like to ask you. You're up for the challenge, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
So before you leave, I'd just like to ask you a question. Exactly, a question that was given to me that I should ask you by my colleagues. You've been a practitioner, you've been a regulator, you've been on the business side, now you sit on the board of an operator. So you've been almost on all sides, which is rare. Perhaps the only part you haven't been, which you tried, is to get on the executive side of government or legislative side via political election. You know, so maybe you should give that a shot one more time. But so far, I haven't been in so many capacity going around the telecom space. Which of these position or areas do you like best? Where would you rather want to be on a long-term basis?
I must confess, before I got the position at NCC, I used to argue in various speeches I made. I was the managing director of a GEC company, GEC Telecom Nigeria. I had been MD for 11 years before I moved on to the NCC as the chief executive. I guess this background I've given is to point to the fact that I think the most impactful years of my life have been my sojourn in the Nigerian Communications Commission. I was privileged at the time I joined that the country was yearning for a revolution of sort. And with me and my colleagues on the board and the staff of the commission, we went ahead to work and delivered what has been generally described as Nigeria's telecom revolution era. So as far as I'm concerned, that has been the most enjoyable part of my life in terms of my working life. And when you're in a company, you work to please your shareholders. When you're working for government, the decisions you take has a big impact on the whole country, on the whole population of a country. So the responsibility on your shoulders, very heavy. So it's not something to be toyed with. And that's why after my sojourn in NCC, I've always advised young people who are interested in politics to start early, those who have genuine intentions, because you might be one of those that will transform this country, because politics is where judges are appointed, ministers are appointed, legislators are appointed, and the like. Regulators are appointed. So it's very important that well-meaning people who have integrity and who are anxious to see this country move to a first world should be thinking of being part of the political process from a very young age. Because when you go out, Obama started very early. Many of the politicians in the US started in their 20s and they grew in the rank. Not people who wake up one day and just join and they are already not sure of what they're doing or where they're going. So the issue here, and it's one of my pet projects, to see how we can actually organize forum where young people can be trained or encouraged to join the political system, because that is where politics is not a game, it's actually a profession that people should be proud of if they do it properly. Thank you very much.
On that note, we would like to end this fireside chat with Dr. Ernest Ndukwe, OFR. It's been my greatest pleasure and honor to have this conversation with you. There is so much you have said. We run out of time. I will not be doing a recap, but viewers should know that you can always go back to the Digital Africa website and all the social media handles. All these conversations will be shared and people can view them. And Dr. Ernest has promised to be back with us on a session where we'll be anchoring and working with young people to motivate them to join politics early, to understand this journey, and to carry the weight of Africa on their shoulders and carry it well. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege, and thank you. Please, as we leave, remember to click on the exit panel button and go backstage so that we can end the session. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure being with you today. And thank you, listeners, everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
challenges. And of course, in terms of COVID-19, the interesting thing about this particular picture is that in terms of impact, infectious diseases was rated around 4.0. However, in terms of the likelihood, it wasn't rated as high. It was rated as 3.0 in the societal impact. So infectious diseases, which is really what COVID-19 is all about, didn't even feature as being one of the things that will really give problems in 2020. However, there's rated water crisis and so on, even higher. Now, also from the environmental side, you look at all the environmental issues, the climate change and so on. Those came very much here, much higher than infectious disease. So what I'm trying to say is not many people predicted COVID-19. There was talk about it a few years ago, but nobody really predicted the magnitude of COVID-19. So again, if you look at the Insight report that followed, again, from the World Economic Forum, talking about the COVID-19 risks outlook, most likely fallout. Again, they did interview people and so on, and they came out with summaries like this. Most likely fallout of COVID-19 is prolonged economic recession. Greatest concern for the world, economics. Most worrisome for your company, economics. This is a bit misleading in my own mind because it's pointing to us using something like the GDP to measure globalized systems of economics. And from the viewpoint of resilience and vulnerability, it could be that GDP is actually a pointer to the vulnerability of globalized systems of economics. And I support the view by, the ecological economists talking about a new measure for economics. Now, if from the World Economic Forum's Insight report, everybody's pointing to, prolonged economic difficulties or challenges, then perhaps it's time for us to start using something like the Genuine Progress Indicator, which again talks about us being able to handle things like COVID-19 better in the future. So I subscribe to that. And COVID-19 then is what I would regard as a VUCA phenomenon, which means something that's highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Again, that's the acronym for VUCA. So COVID-19 sits in this whole uncertainty, risk, opportunity continuum. And some of these, especially the panel session earlier on, some of the people who are running the education programs, education institutions, talking about seeing COVID-19 its impact as an opportunity. So again, it sits on the whole of this spectrum, from uncertainty through to risk to opportunity. The interesting thing here, from a resilience point of view, from managing resilience, is that disruptions, which we tended to look at in terms of risk, cannot be treated in terms of conventional risk. And this is really what COVID-19 has shown us, that disruptions in systems, again, I'm going to introduce the idea of socio-technological systems in just a bit, cannot be treated as risk. So disruptions then will have to be redefined. Disruptions, or whatever you call influences, they can manifest as transient change stressors or intransigent change stressors, or evolutionary, or all of those combined. So we need to treat disruptions as events that exert change stressors on what we call socio-technological systems. Again, just to tidy up on some of this, there are lots of pundits who are saying, oh, technology, and I'm sure that's the whole, one of the things that Digital Africa tries to promote. Technology can solve a lot of problems, can be deployed to solve a lot of problems. The interesting thing is that, and the caveat, is that technology also contains a lot of intrinsic vulnerabilities. So this issue about managing resilience is very, very important, because technology itself can also have intrinsic vulnerabilities. Let me just give you some examples. Just looking at the MIT Technology Review, just yesterday, they're promoting a particular publication which is called Techno-Nationalism. So the interesting thing here is that the arguments around techno-nationalism tendencies are laying bare the differences that countries are having between in the way they handle the pandemic. And so there is clearly a problem a challenge that will come in the way that we deploy technology. Again, just tying back to what I heard Dr. Jude Ndukwe talking about. There is the understanding that the investment that China made much earlier, as 5G was still in research, they were bold enough. They were bold enough to make that investment early enough, and that investment led to some of the Chinese companies, becoming leaders in the 5G technology. And so this issue is something that, you know, predates COVID-19, but is magnified now by COVID-19. This whole issue of techno-nationalism. So last year, some of you who listened to me would have heard me talking about globalism, liberalism, and so on. Now we are into another ism, techno-nationalism. Again, just yesterday, we hear some colleagues, and again, I give some quote here about some of the things that my colleagues are talking about, that we need to understand that we live in a complex system, a system with many interacting agents and whose collective behavior is usually hard to predict. So the key thing that I'm taking out of what my colleagues were saying is, of course, I had already prepared my speech, and a lot of my speech is already published in the IEEE Engineering Management Review, and is the fact that we need to understand the properties of complex systems so that we can be able to deal with these type of challenges. Of course, COVID-19 being one of them. So in my talk now, I'm going to move into just trying to articulate this thing called a socio-technological system. So let me quickly just make that articulation. In talking about socio-technological systems, I want to refer back to the presentations and the talk and the well-established statement that we now know about the fusing of the economic, physical, technological, and socio-political systems into the world of the ecology and environment. So let me start to develop these technological systems piece by piece. The first part of it is we need to understand that the ecology and the environment is an entity in itself that is there, and you know, a lot that happens within that ecology and environment, natural biochemistry, and sometimes we as human beings want to interrupt that, and of course to our own detriment. Of course, from the ecology and the environment, we extract the natural resources. Ecology and environment, we talk about climate and so on. Now, within the ecology and environment, we build socio-economic systems that sit within the ecology and environment. Now, what I've tried to show in this picture is that our socio-economic systems are beginning to touch the boundaries of the ecology and the environment. And when we disturb that, and that's partly how I can explain the effect of climate change, that, you know, when we stretch our socio-economic systems to begin to have an influence on the boundaries of the ecology and environment, well, the ecology and environment will not stretch. It will actually, you know, make sure that it contains our socio-economic system. And how it forces impacts on that is part of what I'm going to talk about. So our socio-economic systems, you know, again, constitute of culture, rules, institutions, individuals, groups, industry firms, markets, and so on. And within our socio-economic systems, then we build our cyber-physical systems. So your transport infrastructure. And in terms of Digital Africa, your telecommunications infrastructure sits within a socio-economic system. And this telecommunications infrastructure we can regard as cyber-physical systems, in the sense that we can, you know, monitor their behavior and so on and so through software. You know, I'm just simplifying that. So what you're seeing then is these technologies linking us between our cyber-physical systems, our socioeconomic systems, and of course, all that is embedded within ecology and environment. And so we have these cybernetic layers, and these cybernetic layers contain virtual and real linkages between networks and networks that exist in our cyber-physical systems and our socioeconomic systems, as well as the unspoken linkages with ecology and environment, which is a natural thing anyway. So you're now beginning to hopefully get an idea of what I mean by socio-technological systems. So most of us spend our times talking about the cyber-physical systems, and of course, a lot of the telecommunications and ICT sits around talking about the cyber-physical systems. But the reality is that we live in a world where the cyber-physical systems themselves are embedded in the socioeconomic systems. And both of those, the cyber-physical systems and the socioeconomic systems, are inextricably, you cannot extricate them. They are inextricably interwoven. Again, I want to emphasize those words. They're inextricably interwoven within the ecology and environment. And so when you start looking at socio-technological systems, the question of resilience becomes very, very important. Because one, the ecology and environment will impose exogenous influences on both our socioeconomic world and our cyber-physical world. The socioeconomic systems will also impose exogenous influences on our cyber-physical systems. Just look at COVID-19, almost knocks out the whole air travel infrastructure, almost overnight. So and that is, it didn't come from the air travel infrastructure. It comes from a health imperative. So again, you can then look at socioeconomic systems as also imposing endogenous risks into the socioeconomic system. Similarly, you then have the cyber-physical systems who provide endogenous sources of risk. We know them, we built them, so we know how they will behave. And so we can actually, and that is, risk means that you have some history. The interesting thing about the ecology and the environment is that their imposition is very uncertain. Okay, we may know about earthquakes and so on, but how do a magnitude 4 could actually trigger also a tsunami somewhere and so on and so forth. So things like COVID-19 have multifarious triggers, and that is really where the challenge comes in. So having given some idea of what I mean by socio-technological systems, let me now proceed into some of the characterization of socio-technological systems. One characterization is hyper-interconnectivity, not just interconnectivity, but it is just growing at astronomical rates. And the speed with which COVID-19 spread from its initial place of origin, or at least that's Wuhan, to the rest of the world, just unbelievable, because we are hyper connected, and also we are also hyper intercommunicating. That means that all of our systems are actually hyper interdependent. Now, some people try to put national boundaries and so on. I think we're wasting time. That is my prediction, because we are already there. Again, for those of you who like some mathematics and so on, I've just put down some very simple equations to show how these things are connected, and that you can describe them in terms of the links between the nodes, where the nodes are the component, constituents, and subsystems of your socio-technological system. And of course, the links between the nodes can be according to certain weights. And again, those weights will depend on the number of networks that you're going to build. So again, this is a bit more technical, but I hope that some people who want to take on the questions or ask me questions can raise those. The reason why I do this characterization, because it's important from a resilience point of view, because any of these things can be attacked. And all of these things become points of vulnerability. So I'm going to just move on to the issue of resilience a little bit more by talking about vulnerability and resilience. Now, being an academic now, spent quite a bit of time in industry. Being an academic now, I can recognize sometimes that in industry we take shortcuts. We take shortcuts on knowledge. Somebody did it that way, so let me do it that way. I think for the young people going forward, that's not going to be your way. You're going to have to understand the kernels of knowledge. So let me talk a little bit about vulnerability and resilience. Often in the discourse on resilience, there's very little said about vulnerability. So what I've done here is just to quote one of the more recent discussions. Again, this is from a digital communications industry person talking about the fact that COVID pandemic has really, created a new sense of urgency and showed us how vulnerable we are, in the world. So the word vulnerability is extremely important in talking about managing resilience. So vulnerability, simple definition, intrinsic or inherent weakness. I want to use an example, a personal example. Many years ago, I found myself, my height went from 5'8" to 6'2" in a period of 18 months. which meant that my midsection was very, very, very weak because the bones didn't have enough time to really strengthen. So I had to go and learn a bit of boxing to strengthen my midsection. And if you watch boxing, anything about boxing, there are a number of points where the boxers hit their opponent. And because they had recognized that those are points of weakness. And so if humans that are created in the way that we are have points of weakness, then anything that humans construct naturally have points of weakness. And that's really what we mean by vulnerability. And so a system is vulnerable then if its intrinsic or inherent weakness is unprotected. And so that means that that particular point of weakness is susceptible to some attack. Now, the attack could be a disruption that comes exogenous onto the system. Now, the attack may not necessarily be attacking the weakness directly, but its effect will be onto the weakness, which will be a latent type of failure. So we see this type of behavior as being very important. So from the point of view of management then, to manage vulnerability, you will need to identify the inherent weaknesses in any system. Now, the military people have known this. This was military tactics from day one. You identify the weaknesses within your opponent. So again, the same thing here. Our social technological systems have inherent weaknesses, and we need to recognize those inherent weaknesses and protect those that we can, and make sure that we are prepared to deal with the fallouts for those that we cannot, especially where the disruptions are coming exogenous onto the system. Endogenous we can handle, but exogenous can be very, very, especially when those exogenous influences or disruptions are uncertain. Okay. So that's really the point about vulnerability. And again, just in terms of illustrating it pictorially here, you can attack the links, you can attack the weights, you can attack the nodes, you can, because of the dependencies, you can then cause the whole socio-technological system to exhibit extraordinary behavior. You can cause it to function in an extraordinary way. And you can then get extraordinary performance. Now, we're used to what we call normative or normal performance. Well, what is normal performance in terms of COVID? We're now beginning to talk about a new normal. We still use the word normal, but we say a new normal. What is a new normal? And again, I'm going to address some of those things in terms of managing resilience as I make this presentation. So, three things that we need to recognize now when we're talking about socio-technological systems. And we do live in a world that is socio-technological. And you can concatenate or delineate those socio-technological systems as best as you want. But what you need to recognize is that we no longer can just talk about them in terms of normality, in the same way that we have before. Rather, we need to start talking about the behavior. And if you know anything about social systems, behavior is not something that is constant. It changes in terms of cognitive dispensation, in terms of attitudes, and so on and so forth. And also we have to talk about functioning. How does it function at this moment in time? And of course, we need to measure the performance against that functionality in the context that it's behaving. So those are the three terms that comes into beginning to manage the resilience of socio-technological systems as we move into this era of Society 5.0. So let me just delve a little bit into resilience. Now, there's a generic definition of resilience: the capacity to recover from difficulty, recover quickly from difficulties. This is assuming that your difficulties will leave you. But if your difficulties persist, what are you going to do? How are you going to recover from that difficulty? You're going to have to change and move according to that difficulty. So this definition itself is actually suboptimal. So what we've done is to redefine resilience a bit more extensive, so that it will allow us to develop better management tools and mechanisms to be able to handle the disruptions that have transient, intransigent, and evolutionary characteristics. These things introduce changes that may be transient. That means that they live for a short period of time. Now, anybody in management knows that often when you excite a system, you wait for it to respond, and then you set up your measures to then. But it's too late, especially that transient, is very, very short. Okay? If you can disruption to be persistent for a little bit longer, then maybe you'll be able to do something about it. And worse still, if that particular disruption or whatever becomes evolutionary, then you're really on your own. And that's what we're seeing with COVID-19. We're seeing a lot of evolutionary disruptions, not just in one dimension, in multifarious dimensions. And that really, begs to looking at resilience as a way of, so we are well beyond the context of risk. We're really into an era of uncertainty, and dealing with uncertainty then means that we need to understand resilience a lot more. So I've got some nice, pretty pictures here. Of having some normal functionality, and we expect, in time, especially if they're cyber physical systems, that in time that normal functionality will degrade, and if we have some sort of a force majeure or whatever that hits it, that it will then fail to some point, and then should be able to recover and so on. So what we've done in this particular description of resilience and how we manage resilience is to describe resilience in terms of a number of stages or phases. And I would just want to talk to those stages and phases fairly quickly. So first stage in resilience management is to really understand that when you are in the stage of absorptive resilience, and in that stage, we can actually describe resilience in terms of three phases. One, when you have a disruption or a change stressor, the system should be able to absorb, and we see it in COVID countries to be able to go into lockdown, to enable us to do some absorption and then to prepare for what we don't know. And we expect then, as soon as you notice that many countries, as soon as lockdown restrictions were lifted, we try to return back to normal, to recover, assuming that COVID was a transient. But we now find that COVID is not a transient. It's actually an intransigent disruption. And of course, we expected all the systems and whatever to restore their linkages and everything, transportation systems, schools back and all that. The travel and so, it didn't happen. It still hasn't happened. And that just tells you that in terms of COVID-19, my position is that the whole world is still, the global systems are still at the stage of absorptive resilience. And how deep can we go? And that is really the question. What is the level of robustness in the system, in the global systems? And that is really the challenge. The next stage is the adaptive resilience phase. Now, it's assumed that some countries have now moved on to adaptive resilience in terms of COVID. But again, we're seeing the so-called second wave and so on in many of these countries. So have we really adapted? Well, that's a question that I leave to most of us to begin to answer. But the point about it is that COVID-19 is a very classic example. So when I set out to speak on this particular topic after my presentation last year, I didn't know COVID was going to be there. So I'm quite happy that COVID came to really help me make the point about some of the things that I'm saying now. COVID is introducing what we call intransigent. There's a transient part of COVID, but COVID-19 is actually more intransigent. And if we don't do what we can to eliminate the spread of COVID-19, it will evolve. And we're seeing that already with people who may have contracted COVID-19 and recovered from it, and then beginning to develop other kinds of health issues that were not there in the first instance. So we will have a stage 2, which again has just one phase, and then there is a stage 3, which is the transformative. And this is really going to challenge us. And a number of the discussions that we're hearing and that we will hear in this particular Digital Africa 2020, we'll really be talking about how prepared are we to deal with the fact that these types of disruptions will have evolutionary components, so that we're prepared to deal with the fact that they will evolve and we need to evolve, not just adapt. Adapt means that you're looking at the change and the change remains permanent. But now you have the fact that the change itself is changing. And so how do you make sure that you're able to cope with that? Because that's what sustainability is asking you to do. If you're not able to, then you, of course, the ecology and environment will sustain. But us, in the way that we live, will no longer sustain. You know, the livelihood that we want to enjoy will probably disappear to some extent, as we have seen already. And we can't gather in large numbers now. And how long will that be? Well, it all depends on how COVID-19, the actual spread of the coronavirus and the understanding of coronavirus, how much we get to understand it well enough. So again, the behavior and functioning and the performance of these systems will continue to evolve, and is really whether are we ready to deal with that. Let me just take two case studies that we have been involved in, in terms of managing resilience of this type of systems and characterizing socio-technological systems. Two of them, one in energy and the other one in education. The one in energy is really, what we tried to do was to apply the lens of vulnerability and resilience to an energy system, an energy infrastructure, energy systems enterprise. And again, without mentioning, the picture there is sufficient to probably point out some of the things. Again, I won't go too much into detail into the picture, but again, if anybody wishes to engage me on it, I will be able to explain it better. I'm looking at time, so I won't be able to get into it. But here, what we were doing was to look at energy systems infrastructure in the context of introducing renewable energy technologies. And what we found out was that despite the introduction of renewable energy technologies, the system itself is still showing increasing instances and durations, not just instances, but also durations of what we call load shedding, which, again, is a big problem. And so that the impact on that on terms of economics and so on and so forth, health systems, education systems, is for anybody to imagine. So what we then, in our analysis, we found out some of the things that are causing, the extraordinary behavior, extraordinary functionality and performance of our energy. And so our mapping shows that the whole energy systems infrastructure is an enterprise is actually deteriorating. Okay? Its whole behavior is actually, what is actually leaving it to sustain right now is the fact that it has inherent robustness. And that inherent robustness is not actually in this cyber-physical infrastructure. The inherent robustness actually is in the socio-economic system, in the way that the socio-economic system was set up to support and to create the energy infrastructure, the cyber-physical infrastructure. So in our own understanding, we have concluded that this particular energy systems infrastructure and enterprise is exhibiting what we call absorptive resilience traits. And it's doing that by actually usurping the inherent robustness in the social systems. So it's very, again, to take a little bit of understanding to appreciate what I'm saying. Often we think of the IT network or the telecommunications infrastructure, and we forget that it is within a social context, and that you can build a lot of robustness within the social context that will actually cause that whole system to sacrifice the physical infrastructure and sustain, and still seemingly perform to some extent. Nigeria is a classic case. We have all kinds of infrastructure completely down in many ways. Many of you who are listening to me are running your own generators to be able to, but that shows that there was a bit of, there was quite a reasonable level of socio-economic redundancy in the system that enables it to go. Now, corruption creates a lot of socio-economic redundancies. Sad, but true. And so part of, the strange thing about corruption and, bad governance is that it tends to create this, what you might call this lethargic behavior within the socioeconomic system that from a resilience point of view seems to create resilience, okay? Because now you're dealing with interconnected systems. So how do you start unpacking those? And that's really our big challenge. So this energy case study, looking at it from the lens of vulnerability and resilience, led us to this particular understanding. Again, we looked at another case study, and this is really how do you use the understanding of resilience to build a resilient system. So in our particular example, and this is something that, again, as most people talk about in terms of Africa being able to leapfrog, we need to begin to understand how to use technology to leapfrog, or rather to build resilience into our social technological world. And the example that I'm showing here is something that was recently done, in recognition of the fact that first we're having people who are teaching in high schools. We have in terms of their demographic, they're getting older, and of course, especially here in South Africa, where I am, we have serious loss in terms of expertise that was that we have high school teachers, especially mathematics, where we've lost a lot of retirement and so on, but wasn't able to replace them. But the number of children, the number of students that come into the high schools just increased. So you needed to find a way to still be able to teach maths effectively and get it across. So again, this is where now we used, talked about building some, using technology to build in resilience, to be able to continue with, reaching that increasing number of teachers, but making sure that the quality of mathematics teaching did not deteriorate. So that was really the point of this particular, so it's actually applying the concept of resilience and looking for technology. So we built, my colleagues who were particularly involved in this, built what they call the MidHub technology platform that enabled that particular disruption in the teaching of mathematics, in particular, teaching and learning activities in mathematics, to become more resilient. That you were able to still reach as many high school kids as possible, especially grade 10 here in South Africa, to make sure that they were able still to get the quality of mathematics teaching, even with the fact that you're having an attrition or reduction in the number of teachers actually available, and in the number of teachers that can reach those students. So this is just two examples of what we've tried to do, applying the lens of resilience and vulnerability. So let me try and conclude, because I know I've spoken for quite a bit and I've tried to speak fairly fast, so I may have lost some of you, but I do hope that those who were able to follow will be able to send some questions one way or the other, or engage me otherwise. So some concluding remarks. To manage vulnerability and resilience, we need to understand a number of things in the context of our VUCA world. We need to understand a number of things. We need to begin to decide which networks, which links, and which nodes should be strengthened, should be weakened, or sacrificed. In fact, COVID is showing us that there's some things that have to be sacrificed for the overall system to be resilient. So that is one thing. And we need to do that to assure a certain level of, desirable level of system resilience. Again, this leads us to a number of imperatives. One is that we need to create, this is now for policy guys, we need to create some way to assure that the system will recover and be restored to some normative state if the nature of the disturbance or the disruption is purely transient. Okay. If the nature of the disturbance is, then we need to create some way of assuring that it will return to normalcy. Now, COVID-19 is telling us that whole idea of normalcy depends on whether the disruption itself is purely transient. and that the time scale of that transient is actually short. However, COVID-19 is telling us otherwise, that we're dealing with uncertainty. The other imperative is to guarantee that somehow we can put in systems or put in some levels of robustness and resourcefulness that will make sure that our socio-technological system adapts to some new sustainable state. Okay. Again, for those of you who are into systems engineering and control engineering, you probably appreciate what I'm saying better. The third imperative is that we need to accept that the system will evolve and hence prepare for that evolution, and then articulate and develop options for mitigation and moving with that evolution. With those four imperatives, I just want to quickly conclude. What's your biggest struggle with working remotely under COVID-19? Now, this is a study that somebody else conducted. I'm just showing the results here. 3 things that they point to. The biggest struggle that people were talking about, 20% of people said collaboration and communication is a big problem. Yes, whilst the technology can enable me to sit here at home, in my study and talk to you and address the digital Africa community listening today, but I'm still far away from you because human communication, 68% of human communication tends to happen face to face. So hopefully, with the video, you can understand some of my body language, and maybe you can make sense of some of what I'm saying. The other point that they also raise is loneliness, and then not being able to unplug. That one I know. We're working harder, longer, and alone. So these are all elements that point to, some systems of non-resiliency. So my challenge to you is to ask, is there any way that technology can really solve all of these resiliency issues? Or will it actually send us further away, into a situation where we're actually acting individualistically? So again, that's a question that I leave out there. So my final statement to us, just like last year, let's go further together. I'm not so sure that technology in its way will enable us, if we use it in the way that the pundits are talking about, will really let us go further together. And we're hearing about techno-nationalism that I mentioned earlier and so on. And I'm sitting, as I said, I'm sitting in my study talking to you. I'm not sure how you're reacting. I can see your faces. I don't know whether you're smiling. I don't know whether you're actually connected anyway, or whether you're just doing something else, and then listening to me on the side. However it happens, but if you were face to face with me, I can read that and so on. So how do we go further together? That's something that we all have to deal with. So on that, I want to again remind us, let's go further together. And from there, I want to thank you all. And as we say in my native language, Ikwere and Meka. No, man, unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Prof?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so definitely we're listening to you. We heard everything. We heard the right body language and the right sign language. We indeed enjoyed your presentation. This is not the end of talking about resilience during the digital conference, Digital Africa. There will be another session on resilience on Thursday afternoon. I want to invite all the guests to also join. With that, we come to the end of today. The conference is not over. It's just over for today. It continues tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with a presentation by Stephen Ibaraki talking about the global trends of AI and innovation accelerating digital Africa. I want to appreciate all our sponsors and all that have spoken today. I want to thank you all for taking out time and being a part of this event. Prof, thank you once again. Now, for our participants and our audience, if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the leave icon. That is how you can exit the panel or exit the session. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.